it's a real chance for us to be able to have much more of a say on electing our legislators, who now have a great deal of influence on selecting our voters. They select us. We should be selecting them.
That was Dixie Snow Hefner with the group Better Boundaries that got Proposition 4 on the 2018 ballot in order to let the public have a greater say in who represents them in government. The proposition passed and is now taking effect. Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's Independent Redistricting Commission. That Proposition 4 on the 2018 ballot asked for the establishment of this commission to suggest these boundaries. That commission was named on Monday. Joining us now live in studio is Noah Rosenberg, the Executive Director of Better Boundaries. Noah, thanks for joining us tonight for this conversation and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Noah, let's start from the beginning. What was the motivation to create a ballot initiative? What were you asking for?
Well, I think that clip that you played of Dixie Hefner was really illustrative of what we were getting at, right? What we wanted to create as Better Boundaries was a redistricting process that every Utahn could be really proud of, that allowed everyone, whether they live in Tremonton or Nephi, to be a part of the redistricting process and make their voice heard.
Now talk about the process of getting on the ballot and the result of that.
Absolutely. So I'm sure many of the folks at home will remember running into one of our canvassers carrying a bright neon orange packet in 2017 or early 2018. We gathered more than 190,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot. And then we spent about 9 months persuading voters across the state to support Proposition 4, which they ultimately did, and Proposition 4 became the law after the 2018 election.
I don't think people realize like all of the effort and the time and the manpower that it takes, right, to push a ballot initiative forward. And you got to see your work come to fruition. Like all of the ballot initiatives in 2018, this one was modified by the legislature. There is an independent commission and there's a legislative group, both focusing on redistricting. So what's the difference between the two?
You know, I think this is a really important distinction to draw here. There's a legislative redistricting committee, which is a subcommittee of legislators, currently serving legislators, who's really similar to any of the other committees that we hear about working at the legislature, right? They review and evaluate proposals around redistricting before sending those proposals on to the full legislature. Contrasting that with the Independent Redistricting Commission, right? The Independent Commission was created by the initiative, and it's meant to be a sort of independent and unbiased look at how districts can be drawn.
So is it to bring more voices to the table and more representation to the table?
Absolutely. It's also about removing the conflict of interest, right? Members of the legislature draw their own districts as part of the redistricting process. And one thing we really wanted to focus on was having an opportunity for folks who don't have a vested interest in the process one way or the other, having a chance to make their voices heard.
Right, because then like the system could be played essentially. The Commission for Redistricting has been appointed. Rex Facer, the chair, will be on the next segment following you. What are your overall impressions of the members of this new commission?
You know, Rosie, the 7 members of the new commission, I look forward to working with every single one of them. They're a wonderful group of folks. I think from the type of people that were appointed, you have former members of Congress, you have former state senators, you have a former Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court and a former judge on the appellate court, right? You have people of serious responsibility to the people of this state in the past. And I think they will show us through their actions that they plan to carry forward that kind of responsible action as they move forward. I think we're really optimistic and we think we can all work together to create districts that every Utahn can be proud of.
So where are we now with the Better Boundaries organization? Are you going to be part of the process moving forward?
Yeah, so Better Boundaries, our aim, right, obviously started with that ballot initiative, but moving forward our goal is really to make sure that the Redistricting Commission is successful and that the public can participate as much as possible in that process, right? Setting up this whole new system for creating districts, really the key ingredient there is participation from the public.
We have about 30 seconds left. I'd like to give the final words to you. Is there anything else that you would like our viewers to know who are watching tonight?
You know, I think the chair, Rex Facer, will get into this a little bit more, but as the commission starts to do their work, they'll be holding community input meetings across the state, which may or may not be digital in the time of a pandemic. But I think as I said before, the key ingredient to a successful redistricting is really the participation of the public in those meetings.
All right, you've been hearing from Noah Rosenberg, Executive Director of Better Boundaries. Noah, thank you for spending your Friday night with us. It was great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Rosie.
The way congressional districts are drawn affect the rights of every person in this country, and they need the protection of our courts in enforcing those rights.
That was Maryland Senator Ben Cardin back in 2019, reacting to the Supreme Court choosing not to weigh in on partisan gerrymandering cases, including one from his state. He felt there should be a federal standard on how maps are drawn across the country. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's Independent Redistricting Committee. Joining us now live via Zoom is the newly named chair of the committee, BYU professor Rex Facer. Rex, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It's good to see you.
Well, the pleasure is mine, Rosie. Thank you for having me.
Rex, let's start with the nuts and bolts of the commission. How are you going to run it? Will there be regular meetings? When will they start? And will they be public?
Sure. I can first say that our meetings will be public. We're governed under the Utah Open Meetings laws, and we will be excited to be open and transparent with the public. We aren't sure yet when our meetings will start. We're working with the commission, both to make sure we get our staffing up and running and to make sure that we figure out the schedules of the other members of the commission.
It's a strange time right now for us, like with COVID and with us not being able to gather to try to get things kicked off. Okay, so let's talk about how you're going to take public input. How can people from the public participate in that input process on redistricting?
Sure, there will be a number of mechanisms. We will have a website that will be available, and through that website there will be an opportunity for people to submit comments. But most importantly, we will have a series of at least seven public meetings across the state in various locations. Now, clearly, a pandemic will perhaps alter some of the mechanisms that we have in those public meetings, but we're committed to making sure we're reaching out across the state to engage with the citizens to get their input so that we understand their perspectives and we're able to represent their desires.
We'd like to talk about and know how you're thinking regarding redistricting for good representation. Is it making the districts competitive? Is it urban versus rural? Is it issue driven where some districts may have different concerns?
Sure. Fundamentally, we were given a charge by both the voters and the legislature of 10 principles that we have to abide by in making our selections. The kind of key principles, if you will, are contiguity, making sure the districts are connected, compactness, making sure that they're not reaching from one end of the state to the other, serving communities of interest. All of those kinds of things we're going to have to balance because when you do one thing, it's kind of like squeezing a balloon in some ways. It squeezes out in the other direction. And so the challenge of the commission is really trying to balance those things in a way that protects it and preserves the interests of our communities and our voters.
Now, a major limiting factor for you will be getting the census data. Let's talk about that. When do you expect to receive that data, and how does it reduce your timeline for your process?
Well, that's actually one of the most scary pieces of this puzzle is that, as people probably are aware, the Census Bureau is already behind schedule. They were originally supposed to have gotten data to Congress to allocate the congressional seats across the country. That hasn't happened yet, and so that's delaying when we'll get the data. The estimates on our accessing the data are anywhere, if the stars align and everything goes really well, it could be as early as late April. Unfortunately, it could be as late as July, which pushes us up against some of the time horizons that the law requires us to meet. And now we're going to try and be as creative as we can in coordinating with scholars that help us access data early, but also coordinating with the agencies across the state that will get us access to that data, so that we can try and meet those deadlines and provide what we need to have useful data driving this process.
Now, in the end, your recommendations will be recommendations, just that. The legislature will make the final decision. How do you think the legislature will take your recommendations?
Well, my hope is certainly that the legislators will take our work seriously, just as we're going to take it seriously, and that will drive a public commitment to trusting the process. We've been nominated by Republicans and Democrats alike, and because of that, we have a commitment to working together across the aisle to do what's in the interest of our citizens. And I hope and I'm confident that the legislators will take that into account, and our recommendations will really end up driving that process in the end.
Rex, we have time for one more question. Final words. What would you like our viewers to know tonight that maybe you and I haven't discussed yet?
Well, I think the most important thing that I want viewers to know is that the Commission is committed to being transparent and as open as we possibly can. We have good people. I'm delighted in the caliber of peers that I have and colleagues that I now have on this commission. I really feel deeply impressed, one, by their willingness to serve on such a challenging issue. But importantly, I want the voters to know that we're going to do our best to be as honest and fair and as transparent as we possibly can.
All right, you've been hearing from Rex Facer, the newly named chair of the Independent Redistricting Commission. Rex, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was great to have you on the show.
My pleasure, Rosie. Thank you very much.
There was no debate, turning the whole process into a joke, and they passed them tonight, hardly with any Democratic votes. It is a sham, and I think it goes down in the annals of Utah legislative history as one of the great shames.
That was Jim DeBacchus, who was the state Democratic chair 10 years ago when Utah got a 4th federal congressional seat, and how the map was divided up to favor, in his view, the Republican Party. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's Independent Redistricting Commission. Joining us now live via Zoom is Lauren Simpson, the Policy Director for the Alliance for a Better Utah. Lauren, thanks for your time tonight and welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Rosie.
Lauren, when Proposition 4 was passed in 2018, what were your hopes, or what did you hope the redistricting would be based on?
Yeah, so I think this whole push for reform around redistricting came because the people of Utah didn't want a repeat of what happened in 2011, like that clip you just played. And the last time that Utah conducted a redistricting process, there was, a big public process. There was a listening tour around the state. And then at the very last minute, the legislature, tossed out all those maps and instead adopted a map that came from a national Republican group. And people of all different political persuasions, both Republicans and Democrats, recognized that this was fundamentally unfair. And so I think everyone is really hopeful that this time around we can do better and we can get maps that truly reflect the people of Utah who live here and our communities, and not the interests of, outside partisan groups.
Now, where do you draw the line between gerrymandering and not gerrymandering in a district? What does representation mean for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think when we talk about these terms like, representation or fairness, it can sound really abstract. But luckily, some very smart political scientists have come up with objective ways that you can measure these things. There are objective ways that you can measure what a fair district looks like, and what a district looks like when it's unfairly biased towards one side or the other.
Now, after Proposition 4 was voted on by a majority of Utahns, the legislature made a compromise on it, like they did with all the propositions of 2018. What do you think will be the effect on the compromise on redistricting?
Yeah, so that compromise watered down the bill. It diluted the proposition that was passed into law by Utah voters. And I think that underscores why that proposition was so necessary in the first place. It shows that ultimately the people of Utah can't fully trust the legislature when it comes to redistricting. And so we are very hopeful that this new independent commission can provide some meaningful transparency and accountability into the process, and help the legislature play fair when it comes to drawing new maps.
Now, the commission has been established. How do you feel about it, and what are you going to be watching for as they progress with their work?
Yeah, I think, speaking for myself and my team, I think we're all really enthusiastic about the appointments that have been made. We're eager to see this process start. We'll be watching closely, and we will be helping people get engaged and know how to provide input, because ultimately, good maps are just a reflection of our communities. And so people getting involved in the process is really the best way to ensure that we have maps that reflect all of us.
Now, one of the reasons why we're having this discussion tonight is because this is a process that the public can participate in. So we want to know, what do you recommend to the public, to the people who are watching tonight, on what they can do to make their voices heard?
Yeah, I would say for now, stay tuned for any announcements from the commission. We're waiting on that timeline as well and excited to see that. And in the meantime, I think it's also really important to talk to your friends and family members about why having fair maps and fair representation matters. Because the more people who are engaged and involved on this issue, the better for everyone.
Do you have any idea maybe which district we may see the most changes from? I mean, sometimes I wonder a lot about the 4th Congressional District. I want to hear, what do you think?
I mean, that's hard for me to speculate, but I know that a lot of the focus last time was on, growth on the Wasatch Front, or this new 4th Congressional District that was added. But when we think about gerrymandering in Utah, it's really a problem that we see across the entire state. And so I'm really encouraged by this new commission, and I'm hopeful that, any new maps that are drawn, are drawn fairly across the state and really reflecting everyone.
All right, you've been hearing from Lauren Simpson, Policy Director of the Alliance for a Better Utah. Lauren, thanks for spending part of your Friday evening with us. It was great to have you back on the show.
Love to do it. Thanks, Rosie.